I got drawn in on sort of into the subject about what happens after the fire, and I just want to share some experience with you.
I learn so much by talking to other people that I meet, and I make really long-standing connections.
Pouring water onto an EV in thermal runaway is like pouring water onto the roof of your house when your kitchen's on fire. Thank you, gentlemen.
Well, here we are, me again, talking about the good old subject of PEEPS and higher risk buildings. Let's make sure I've got the right... I always start with remembering. It's very easy with the amount of regulation, change, all the things we have to do, to forget why we're actually here, the lives that were affected, and that 37 of the residents lived in Grenfell Tower. And in my experience, and I've been doing this since about 2009, that is a fairly typical profile, particularly in social housing. None had PEEPS, and yet what we now know from Chapter 6 of the Phase 2 report, that actually RBKC and the TMO were fully aware of 17 of the disabled people who died. They knew they were disabled, and they knew that they couldn't possibly evacuate the building. Food for thought. So, Phase 1 recommendation, I think we all know it, don't we? Owner and manager of every high-rise residential building be required by law to prepare personal emergency evacuation plans for all residents whose ability to self-evacuate may be compromised, such as persons with reduced mobility or cognition. Very simple, isn't it? It's not difficult. However, I presented here 2 years ago, and the day before, Lord Greenhalgh caused me almost to rip on my presentation, as I've had to do today, and restart, because he told the House of Commons that on practicality, it wasn't practical, it wasn't proportionate, and it wasn't safe to do PEEPS. And that sent shockwaves through 24% of the population in the UK, in England and Wales, that if you live in a multiple story building, that we, with all our technology, all our expertise, we actually can't keep you safe. It's not practical. And it's definitely not proportionate. Can I just ask, I ask this every presentation, hands up, how many of you would live in a building that had no means of escape? Deadly silence. How many of you would advise your young person going off to university and student halls if the fire alarm goes off? Stay put. Again. So are we saying do what we say, not do what we do? So, 2 years ago, August 2022, the consultation on emergency evacuation information sharing plus, not quite sure what the plus was about, closed. After that, deadly silence. No response, nothing. Until yesterday morning. Gee, thanks, Home Office. Caused me to rewrite. So you have got a fairly flat presentation, I'm afraid. No pictures. What I could pull together yesterday, having ploughed through the pages of the response. So, I'm concentrating on the conclusions. There is no evidence that RPs have been able to broadly implement workplace-type PEEPS that are practical, proportionate, or safe in a way that allows a person to evacuate a building unassisted in a residential setting. That might have been true in August 2022. However, 2 years on, RBKC are delivering PEEPS, annual letters to 5,734 general needs homes, encouraged to self-identify. Oh, and surprise, surprise, family members, care staff and willing neighbours act as buddies. Wow. Lambeth Council, this was the result of FOI requests by The Guardian. They've developed 2,529 PEEPS since 2017, and they update them, not just for those covered by the Quality Act, but real PEEPS. Southwark Council, training 160 managers, and I know that because we're training them. East Suffolk Council, been rolling out PEEPS for 2 years. Flintshire County Council, also training up managers to deliver PEEPS. And then the rest are the result of a fairly quick snapshot of Google. So it would appear there is evidence. Housing associations. Again, I can't promise that they're all doing it in the full detail it should be done, but they are all stating they're doing PEEPS. So that rather gets rid of conclusion 3 from the consultation. Right, let's move on. Conclusion 5. The scope of residential PEEPS will go beyond that of consultation. Mandate residential PEEPS for all high-rise residential buildings between 11 metres and 18 metres. But there's a caveat. Only with simultaneous evacuation strategies in place. Okay? Why? Because at this stage, the additional costs are considered to be disproportionate. So what happens to all the disabled people who are living in under 11 metres, but on the 5th floor? What happens if they can't evacuate? How much of a problem are they in? Well, let's look at costs. Now, these aren't my figures. These are NFCC and government figures in their impact assessment dated 8th of June 2021. Gross hourly wage, oh, by the way, it's page 11. Gross hourly wage of an RP estimated at £20.68. Presumably that's an internal rate. NFCC estimate time to develop a PEEPS 2 hours. From experience, if you get your process correct and your background and your framework in place, I would say that's achievable. So I wasn't great at maths at school, but even I think I can more or less do that. £41.36 per PEEP. So let's just roll back. Grenfell, 37 disabled residents. Total direct costs, and clearly there are indirect costs, but direct cost of developer PEEP, 1,530 for all of them. Service charge costs per month increase per flat, and this is just for the first year, £12.75. Cost of a life? It's no wonder disabled people think our lives are unimportant. Conclusion 7. We will therefore mandate RPs to undertake reasonable steps to identify vulnerable residents. Reasonable endeavours. I'm actually quite glad to see reasonable endeavours, because the second I saw the regulation for fire door checks, which are, may I remind you, best endeavours, sent a shiver down my back. When I was a nasty old BT bid and project manager, we wouldn't even touch a contract. We wouldn't even express an interest in a contract that said best endeavours, because it is so onerous. So we've got reasonable endeavours. That's okay. If contact is not easily established, remember, RBKC and TMO knew about the majority of their disabled people because they gather them at tenancy, at lease, and in fact, when they are making adjustments. So can I just remind ourselves, the law, a bit of old-fashioned bunny, Article 14, in the event of danger, it must be possible for persons to evacuate. Nothing there about them identifying themselves. as quickly and as safely as possible. Nothing there about waiting for the fire and rescue services to arrive. How many of us would wait? I bet you if the fire alarm went off, we'd be out of that door as quick as a shot. 15. Establish and where necessary, give effect to appropriate procedures, including safety drills. Doesn't say, but not in general needs buildings. That's the law. How much wriggle room is there? To be followed in the event of serious and imminent danger. What about the disabled resident whose flat is on fire, who can't even move away one floor down? Stay put buildings, well, you don't need to have PEEPS, do you? Stay put. But you do if your flat is in fire. And then there's nominate a sufficient number of competent persons to implement those procedures. And I'd just like to draw your attention to what it doesn't say. It does not say they have to be employees. Now, traditionally at AAA, we avoid using employees like the plague. And I have to say that's primarily because the Health and Safety Act and the management of health and safety regulations. I see strategies where waking watches are required to run into burning buildings, bang on doors, and drag disabled people out. I do have to wonder what the health and safety risk assessment looks like. And particularly with the BSR, I think they might be a little more interested in health and safety of employees. Employees can only ever be volunteers because you would not want to put that in a contract. By the way, Jane, you have to stay in the burning building to help so-and-so, and if you don't, we'll fire you. It's not going to fly. So, conclusion 8. We're going to mandate PCFRAs in regulation. Now, I'd say yes. That's got to be positive, hasn't it? While allowing RPs the flexibility to continue with existing processes. Can I just bring your attention to the fact, because we are now muddying the water between a PCFRA and a PEEP. A PEEP is a tailored strategy designed to provide safe evacuation procedures for individuals. A person-centered fire risk assessment proactively identifies hazards and develops protective strategies to minimize risk. There are two different beasts. Now, they go hand in hand, but they are two different beasts because a PCFRA on its own does not necessarily meet the requirements of the FSO because the FSO is about getting out the building. And conclusion 8 goes on then, and now it gets really interesting. So it's all very positive, implementation of reasonable proportionate measures, noting the limitations in conclusion 11, which are to do with Article 50 and proportionate costs. This could include the use of family members, neighbours or other volunteers. Now, I think Ed, who sat over there, would probably cheer at this point because we both sat on the Home Office Fire Safety Working Group for our sins, and it was a hard load of meetings. But then we get to the use of volunteers to support can be considered, and it would be for the resident to source. Now, I don't have a big problem with that because they know their neighbours, they know their friends, and they know who they can trust, or can they? Because don't forget, organisations and the fire and rescue services have a duty of safeguarding. Now, safeguarding is protecting people and residents, vulnerable adults, from abuse, from cuckolding, from people who may not have their best interests at heart. And it is very easy to see that, yes, the disabled person and the family do know who they can trust. But there has to be checks to make sure that they are fine. And also that the person is competent and able to deliver what they're volunteering to. And may I just say that age should not be a limiter. We've done PEEPS where we've had 89-year-olds being a buddy, particularly for a wife who was severely disabled, because we judged he wasn't going to leave her anyway, and he was actually fit as a fiddle. So, A particular concern in conclusion 9 was how far a resident or RP could reasonably rely on a volunteer. Well, we have evidence from the Grenfell Tower. We have evidence about human behaviour. This isn't conjecture. This isn't about sort of, oh, somebody's having a nice thought, everyone's cosy. We know that the injuries and fatalities went up because residents refused not only to leave family members, but people they barely knew. Sayed Fayad on the 23rd floor. Died with injuries consistent with the fall, after fighting the fire for hours, refusing to evacuate with his wife and son because he was sheltering for disabled people. That's human behaviour. And yes, there's no such thing as zero risk. A neighbour, a friend could be out, but then so could an employee. An employee could be at a meeting in another, off sick, having a cigarette, going for coffee. There is no difference. You're looking for a matrix of people that can cover most of the day. So, conclusion 10. RP is ultimately responsible. Yes, we know that. Accepting that in the general case, a resident will make the decision whether or not to implement a measure within their flat. That's a bit tricky, isn't it? So we're talking about PCFRAs here, and the responsible person, or rather, let's say, a firefighter has done a home safety visit, he's walked in, he's found oxygen, he's found evidence of unsafe smoking, he's found a mobility scooter on a long end of an extension charging in the hall. He's found daisy chaining of umpteen electrical, I'm going to the extreme here, I realise that, piles of incontinence pads in the corner that we all know are combustible. And then he goes in the kitchen and he can see evidence of near misses of fire. So he goes out, contacts the RP and says, got a problem here, mate. Think you need to get in there. So the good old RP or his representative goes in and he goes, we need to put water mist in here. We need to put in additional electrical sockets. But oh, by the way, you've got to pay for it. Okay. What's the person going to say? Social housing on benefits? I haven't got any money. Or they're going to say, on your bike, Gov. So what does the RP do then? Walk out, close the door. He knows there's a life safety risk. He knows there's a risk that could cause risk to other people. But the resident either hasn't got the capacity to pay or is refusing to do so. Not sure that flies. And also, can I just remind you, as far as an auxiliary aid or an assisted escape device, we have something called the Equality Act. Had it since 2010. Pretty standard. You're not allowed to directly discriminate. Now, I can't imagine anything more discriminatory than providing means of escape for some of the population and not for the 24% of the others who may or may not be able to evacuate. I've had many conversations with disabled people who have been in buildings where there have been complete evacuations and they are left there sat at the head of the glitzy glass stairwell, staring down at the car park, looking at all the important people standing out in the car park, and they're left there. It's very, very clear that the provision of an auxiliary aid, where not doing so puts disabled people at a substantial disadvantage, breaches the Equality Act. And oh, by the way, you are not allowed to charge a disabled person per se, which makes it a little awkward with the proposals coming out. I suggest you go, if you haven't already read it, the LGA EEIS response, where they make it very clear that public sector, it's anticipatory, and treating disabled residents differently in buildings of different heights is likely to be unsustainable in the face of legal challenge under equality law. And at the moment, it's in excess of, on the Vento scale, 58,700, and can be higher for causing stress. And I think it's pretty stressful not being able to evacuate a building. So, we come on to conclusion 13, and this is where, for me, my mouth dropped. In the event of a fire, the Fire and Rescue Services will fight the fire and undertake the evacuation. Now, we know you do. Of course you do. If it has to be evacuated, the odds are you're going to mount it. But you have never before had it stated that it is your duty of care to do so. And I'd be amazed if every chief fire officer isn't hopping up and down on hot coals at the moment, because that means not only rescuing, and I know you all know the difference between evacuation and rescue. Let's face it, evacuation, pre-planned, tested, works. Rescue, preserve life at all costs. Throw a disabled person over your shoulder, fireman's lift or whatever you do, and run out the building. If a paraplegic becomes a quadriplegic, well, hey, you're not dead. And evacuation is completely different. So, you're going to get the information. So, Incident Commander with his nice ruggedized digital device, I'm not going to call it an iPad because it might be something different. We don't want to use branding. Oh, look, in my graphical interface, I've got 3 disabled people up on the 23rd floor. Yep, that's good. They've got PEEPS. And I think they've got an assisted escape device. That's good. That's really, really good. So, NFCC Code of Practice. There we go, 3 or more firefighters, an additional required for a bariatric person. 2 or less firefighters with no additional equipment required for a person with mobility impairment. Now, can I just mention that if you applied that to an evacuation of the 37 disabled residents of Grenfell Tower, LFB would operationally have had to plan for 74 firefighters if you take a mean average of 2 per disabled person. Is that practical? Just to evacuate disabled people. However, let's go on with our hypothetical incident. So, Incident Commander decides, the building needs to be evacuated. Go up to the 22nd floor and make sure that the disabled people, residents who are up there, are evacuating. Up they go. Yep. Resident 1 has bought an assisted escape device. There's only one problem. They've gone on Amazon.com. They do some really nutty little numbers there. Dead cheap, £139. No reason why they can't, because remember, under the EEIS proposals, we're saying go buy your own. The likelihood is they will not have gone to a supplier as an organisation would have done. They'd have gone for the cheapest. Why wouldn't you? Even if they could afford it, because £139 will be beyond the scope of many. So your hapless firefighter, okay, fine, gets the kit out, highly unsuitable, because the man in fact exceeds the kilos weight limit on the evac chair. Nonetheless, they start to try to go down the stairs. The chair collapses, injuring both the firefighter and the disabled person. Who's legally responsible? The RP for not having an emergency plan? The Fire and Rescue Services for not undertaking a safe evacuation, not having checked or trained the person? Or the disabled person themselves? And I have to say, all I can see here is a legal quagmire. Add on to that. 2 years ago, Phil Murphy, anybody here 2 years ago? When Phil Murphy presented the University of Leeds and his research into the IRS data, going back to 2009, 2010, provided by the Home Office, which found that if you are in the vicinity of a fire for more than 20 minutes, you're more likely to die than be rescued. Now, that is evidence. That's IRS data. But what it also showed was that from the start of a 999 call, 27 minutes on average, in a multi-storey purpose-built block of flats. 27 minutes. And that's just on average. Imagine sitting there waiting for somebody to come and help you for 27 minutes, and could be a lot longer. Now, that's not the Fire and Rescue Service's fault, but under these proposals, they're suddenly assuming, as far as I'm concerned, the duty of care for every disabled resident. And I remember having a discussion some years ago with, I think it was with Greater Manchester, about duty of care. Oh, we can't accept duty of care because that would mean we'd have to sit an appliance outside your door. There are huge funding issues with this. How do you train firefighters to the myriad of different assisted escape devices? How do you train them about all the different impairments? This is considerably complex if you're going to throw it all back on fire and rescue services, when actually you've got huge resources within that building. Now, I was a director of an RMO when the FSO first came in. I remember the silence around the boardroom. I say boardroom, dining room table on the ground floor flat. When our legal advice came back that said, yeah, you're completely legally responsible for all of this. We're volunteers. I never opted for that. I just ticked the box to say I was willing to be a director. The legal responsibility has been very clear. And I must admit, when I looked at all the guidance, I thought, this is quite good. It all stacks up. The fire risk assessment, means of escape for disabled people, the legal responsibility is very clear. Evacuation plan has to be without the assistance of the fire and rescue services. Sleeping accommodation, the same. That's unusual for government to have it all stacking up. This blows all of that out the water. And I would suggest all of that is going to have to be reviewed, reissued, republished. And I am also very concerned about the Article 50 changes to allow residents to challenge the costs for evacuation of disabled people. Disabled residents are fearful of hate crime. It happens a lot. And they are fearful of even putting their hand up and saying, I can't evacuate. Very quickly, before Kizzy jumps up and tells me to be quiet. Competency, competency, competency. At AAA, we're passionate about this, not just for disabled residents and their safety. We're passionate about it for RPs, having the evidence to say you're doing it, and also that you're doing it in a cost-effective manner. I still bear the scars from bid sign-offs, I can assure you. And being cost-effective in everything that we do. We've gone down the route of IFE recognition, so going through accreditation for over 18 hours of training. It is remote training. It's not tick box, but we have remote simply because I love instructor-led. But with all the guidance and everything that is coming in, instructor-led is almost out of date by the time we delivered it. And with that, I'd just like to finish with the Grenfell Tower Testimony Week. I attended every day, every session. It was one of the most moving experiences of my life. There were the defendants, the defence lawyers, and there were the survivors and the families. And on the final day, it still gives me good fun. They turned and faced the defendants and said, you might not have been in charge at the time of the fire, but what have you done to change? And yet, 7 years later, millions of disabled residents still live in residential buildings with no means of escape, even from a fire in the vicinity. I believe we are the best in the world. I also believe we can do better, and we have to do better. And thank you.